Hey guys, welcome back to this week's video. I apologize, it's like a day late. What are you gonna do? Better late than never. Okay, let's just get straight into it now. I mean, no disrespect to anyone involved in this case or affected by this case. It's just all different pieces that I've found online and I've pieced it all together sort of thing and tried to make this video. Okay, so today we are doing the Muswell Hill murderer, Dennis Nilsen. So a little bit of a backstory on Dennis first. He was born November 23rd, 1945 in Fraserburgh, Scotland. Again, sorry if I pronounce these words wrong. I'm just not very good at pronouncing things. Dennis's father, Olav Nilsen, was a Norwegian soldier and he moved to Scotland in 1940, and soon after that he married Elizabeth, Dennis's mother, and he had 3 children with her, Dennis being the middle child. Dennis was an adventurous child. He was like outgoing, he was really into exploring, and he was very close to his grandfather. And he actually described some of his best memories as a child and his moments being with his grandfather, and they'd walk along the beach and they'd explore things together. And that was until October 1951 when his grandfather passed away at sea from a heart attack. After this, Dennis kind of just became really reserved and quiet. He would often play games with his younger sister Sylvia, but he was very kind of reserved and quiet and didn't get out much, didn't really speak to a lot of people, but he did still go and walk along and watch the ships and the boats dock like he did with his grandfather. Later on, Dennis started going through puberty, and this is when he realized that he was pretty sure he was homosexual, which at first he was really confused and he was ashamed and he didn't tell anyone. He didn't want people to know. So at 14, he joined the Army Cadet Force to try and get out of his small town. His aim was to get into the army so that he could get out of his town and just get away. In school, he was above average. He really excelled in history and art, and he finished school in 1961. And after he finished school, he wanted to join the army and become a chef. So Dennis went and sat the exams and he passed and he got in, and he got enlisted for 9 years service at, now if I don't pronounce this right, I'm sorry, St. Omar Barracks in Aldershot. While in Aldershot, he kept his sexuality secret. He didn't really try to mingle too much around the guys, especially all of them would shower together in like a big shower block, and he never did. He would always wait until everybody else was done and then he would shower. And that was because, what he said was because he feared of getting an erection in front of them and that they would judge him. In 1964, Dennis passed his catering exam and he was assigned to the Royal Fusiliers in Osnabrück. I'm not good with these words. In West Germany. Around this time is when Dennis started to become a little bit of an alcoholic. He would drink often, and all of his colleagues would sort of all drink together, and they made up a name for themselves. It was called the Hard Working Boozeheads or something like that. But on one occasion he got drunk with a young German boy and he woke up on the floor of the boy's flat. But apparently there was nothing sexual that happened. They both just passed out drunk and that was that. But this is kind of where Dennis's sexual fantasies all kind of like kicked in a lot. And this is where it kind of started unraveling and getting worse. Started dating a young man, and their sexual encounters led to Dennis actually fondling him while he was sleeping, and then that turned into getting him drunk and him becoming unconscious, and then Dennis would go further with him. And sometimes while drinking with his colleagues, he would pretend to be unconscious to try and get them to perform sexual acts on him, and he kind of just like got off on this. After 2 years, Dennis returned from Aldershot, and then he was deployed again to work as a chef in the British Army in Norway. In 1969, he was transferred to Cyprus, and this is where he had his first sexual encounter with a female who was a prostitute. And he said that sex with a woman was depressing and overrated, and he didn't understand it. In 1972, he ended his military career of 11 years with the rank of corporal. Now, this is when we start getting into his victims and when he started his killings. Dennis's first victim was in 1978, where he'd met a young boy at a local pub and he invited him home. He slept with the boy for the night, and then the next morning he strangled him with a tie and then drowned him in a bucket of water. Dennis then took his body to the bathroom, washed it, cleaned it, then went and placed it back in bed and attempted to have sex with the body, but he was unsuccessful. He then spent the night again with the dead man, and in the morning he put his body under the floorboards for 7 months before removing it and burning it. His second victim was a Canadian tourist, Kenneth Ockenden. In 1979, Kenneth came back to Nilsen's flat where he was strangled. This time, Nilsen took photos of the body. He successfully had sex with him, and then he placed the body under the floorboards where he would frequently remove it and have conversations as if Kenneth was still alive. 5 months later was Kenneth's third victim, a homeless 16-year-old Martin Duffy, who spent the night at Nilsen's on May the 13th, 1980. He did the same thing as the first two victims with Martin, but this time he masturbated several times over the body, and he kept him in a wardrobe for 2 weeks before removing him and putting him under the floorboards with Kenneth. Billy Sutherland was the fourth victim of Dennis Nilsen. He was a 27-year-old prostitute who encountered the same tragedy as the victims before him. His next 5 victims were all unidentified, and Dennis said he doesn't really remember much about them, including their names. 23-year-old Malcolm Barlow was the final victim at the Melrose Avenue apartment. Malcolm was an orphan with learning disabilities and died from strangulation. And by this time, Dennis was running out of room to store these bodies, so he shoved Malcolm's body under the kitchen sink. He had to spray his apartment twice a day to keep all the flies away from the pretty much rotting bodies. And when neighbors asked what the smell was and if he had the smell in his apartment, he would blame it on the structure of the building. So just a little warning, I am going to go into how he got rid of the bodies now, so if you don't want to hear it, just skip a little forward or just mute it while I say these parts. There will be no pictures, but just a little warning in case you're a bit squirmy. So he would get naked, dismember the bodies on his kitchen floor. He would boil their skulls on the stove to remove any flesh. He would place the organs in plastic bags, and the limbs he would bury in the garden and store in the shed. And torsos would be shoved into suitcases until he had time to put them in a bonfire. And majority of the time, what I've read is that he had a bonfire going a lot of the time and no questions were ever asked about it. In 1982, to try and stop his homicidal behavior, he moved to a top floor apartment with no garden and no floorboards in North London. But after his arrival, he had a further 3 victims. The victims were 23-year-old John Howlett, 27-year-old Graham Allen, and his final victim, 20-year-old Stephen Sinclair. So because of the design of the apartment, it was hard for Nilsen to get rid of these bodies. Obviously, he couldn't just carry them out the front door and put them in the trash or something like that, because his neighbors would see, because he was on the top floor. So he would do the same as he did before. He would dismember the bodies, boil them, but then he would chop them up into as many pieces as he could, and what he could flush down the toilet, he would flush down the toilet. Now, none of the other tenants in the building really knew Dennis that well. didn't really speak to him. He didn't really speak to anyone. But after speaking to a couple of the other tenants that were in the building, one of the tenants decided to call out a drain specialist because of a blockage in the building. So I didn't find out too much more about why they ended up calling out, obviously, a blockage, but I'm pretty sure the other tenants in the building all spoke and they all were having the same problem, so they just decided to call out a drain specialist, but obviously not asking Dennis because no one spoke to him. So the specialist came out and they discovered rotting human remains that were causing the blockage, and the next day a police investigation was started. What I find weird is that a police investigation wasn't started on that day. I don't know why. I couldn't find out why a police investigation wasn't started on that day. Police didn't come out till the next day, which is a bit strange. So by this time, Dennis became really aware that he was going to be caught. Like he couldn't get away with it because he'd flushed down the pieces down the toilet, so there'd be obvious signs that there was human flesh being put down his toilet and human remains being put down his toilet. Like, it's not like it wouldn't trace back to him, and he knew this. So he began to try and cover his tracks. So that night he tried to get as much human remains out of the drains as possible. The next day he went to work and he told a colleague that if he wasn't in the next day, he would either be ill, dead, or in jail. And that's exactly what he said. That evening, a Detective J came to question Nilsen as he was questioning everyone else in the apartment. Nilsen was happy to let him in, happy to be questioned, but as soon as Jay got into that apartment, he could smell the foul, disgusting smell. And he asked Nilsen, he was like, "What is that smell? Where is it coming from?" And Dennis was open. He didn't freak out, he didn't get aggressive, he just calmly confessed and told that what he was looking for was around the apartment in different bags. At this time, he was arrested and he admitted to killing 15 young men and attempting to kill another 7. I look really greasy and gross, but a quick little editing note. I forgot to mention that he admitted to killing 15, but he only actually killed 12 and he made the rest up. So there is a lot of other pieces in this story that I didn't go over because if I did, this video would just be way too long. But I will leave some links down below that you can go and check out what happened like in between these kind of things. So he did at some points try to take boys, try to strangle them when he was in the police force after he left the army. I didn't put that in because I could have just gone off on a real big tangent like I'm gonna do now. I don't even know how that's how you say it, but anyway, I will link some things down below and you can go and check it out for yourself and read a bit more into it if you want to. So after this, he was really eager to help police in anything they needed help in, which is a bit strange. A lot of killers don't want to help the police. They don't want to tell them what they've actually done, where they've put the bodies, because if they all did, things would be a lot easier. But at no time during this he showed remorse for what he did. So Nilsen was held at Brixton Prison until the trial, which was on October the 24th, 1983. And he was charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 charges for attempted murder. He pleaded not guilty and diminished responsibility due to a mental defect. So because of this, 2 psychiatrists met with Nilsen and determined that he was suffering from false self syndrome and had an impaired sense of responsibility. But the prosecution called in another psychiatrist that had spent more time with Nilsen, and he said that there was no evidence in what the other psychiatrist was saying, and he said that Nilsen was very manipulative and yes, he did have some signs of mental problems, but he was 100% completely responsible for his actions. And the jury summed up that the mind can be evil without having problems. On November the 4th, 1983, the judge delivered the verdict of guilty for all 6 counts of murder and sentenced Dennis Nilsen to life in prison with no parole for at least 25 years. On May the 12th, 2018, Dennis Nilsen died from natural causes in Full Sutton Prison, Yorkshire, England, at 74 years old. So he lived out his life. Like, even though he was in jail, he still lived out his life after he killed all these people. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. Sorry that it's a bit late, but better late than never. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at LaraRayYT. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you know when I post next in case I miss a Wednesday again. I try to post every single Wednesday. You'll see me next week. Bye, guys.